Are you doing it?
Yeah, I started it. We're recording.
I'm not seeing you.
You're not seeing me?
You're frozen.
You're frozen.
You're frozen. We can hear you though.
Actually, it's a good look for you, Rich. Just stay right there.
Now you're bringing it on yourself.
There we go.
Don't be dragging me into this.
All right. So it's funny. It takes a little while for it to get the recording started and going, but we're good.
You're still frozen?
No, I'm unfrozen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Let's see. All right. So Revelation. So I sent out the notes. I called the letter to the church a summary. It's really not so much of a summary outline as it is a listing of the things that we've learned as we've looked at these letters. So I just wanted to spend a little time to go over that because I was blessed, I guess is the right word, by just how much was in these letters and how much there was for us to take away. Because this is the real, this is this part of Revelation that's about the church age. So it's where we are and where we live. It's what we're in the middle of, and so it seemed important for us to spend a little more time on this. We okay?
Yeah, I can't get the
Passing your notes out.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Hey, copies.
You don't have to have them. It's just that it's nice to have.
Yeah, if it goes away, you're in trouble.
Doesn't matter.
Oh,
You're losing
You're
control of the
horrible.
class.
We have a menu right across your chin.
Yeah.
There you go.
Get that.
Move the mouse out of the way, it disappears. Eventually. All right. Let's get going anyway. Boy, now I got a menu in the middle of mine. All right. So the letters to church. First of all, at the beginning of each of the letters, if you remember, there was a description of the author, and it really, most of them related back to the description of Christ that's given in John's first vision back in chapter 1. So let's just kind of go through these descriptions of Christ. First, he holds the 7 stars in his right hand. And what were the 7 stars? This is the quiz portion of the lesson here. What were the 7 stars?
Pastors.
The 7 pastors or leaders of those churches, right? He walketh in the midst of the 7 golden lampstands. What were the 7 lampstands?
Churches.
The churches.
The churches, right? The 7 churches that we visited. Okay, so he is the first and the last. He's always been around, always will be. And then focusing on he was dead and is alive. Again, going through the resurrection of Christ. He who has a sharp 2-edged sword, what did that speak of?
The word of God.
The word.
Word, the Bible, Joe said. Can you hear her? Yeah, so it's about the word, but particularly it's about the judgment of the word, right? It's about the cutting apart of bone and marrow. It's about the word cutting and separating. He's listed as the Son of God, right? Kind of showing his authority, his connection to God. He's not here as our best friend. He's here as the Son of God to bring judgment. Eyes like a flame of fire, feet like fine brass. Both of them, again, have to do with judgment. He's able to see all the sin. He's able to see all of the iniquity. And then the feet like fine brass, if you remember, that was about tramping down sin. So again, those both were about judgment. 7 stars, we've already mentioned. It's just listed again in one of the churches. He who is holy, he who is true, right? So this was again about his character as he can see. This typically followed the phrase, I have seen your works. He who is holy because he's holy, he doesn't allow sin, and so he. This was in context of Philadelphia church. If you remember, he was saying how wonderful they were. Even someone who is holy and is true was saying how wonderful they were. That's a pretty good commendation. He who has the key of David, what was that about? Come on, give David. What was the key to?
The kingdom?
Key to the kingdom? Yes.
What was the key to the kingdom? There were three things. Remember, the key to the kingdom. And when we say king to the kingdom, that really is two things. It's really the key to heaven, if you will, the key to entrance, right, and the key to salvation, and both of those things. But then there was one more thing that it was the key to. The most important one, which you've forgotten. It was the key to service, if you remember, right? They had the opportunity to witness to the Jews. So the key that they were given, it was the key to blessing, it was the key to heaven, and it was the key to service. He is the Amen. To me, that's just, it's the final stamp at the end of the book, right? There's nothing else that comes after what he says, the faithful and true witness. And then the beginning of creation was all about that he is the creator. He's not that he was created, but he's the creator. That was the emphasis of that. Then we go into the commendations that he had for the churches. Some churches got commendations and some didn't. Some were around their labor, their works, the things that they did, their patience. You cannot bear them that is evil, right? They didn't put up with those people that were evil in their church. You've tried them. In other words, you've tested those who've come before you to see whether they had a true word or not, or it was from the apostles. Patience for my name's sake. Again, laboring and not fainting. He commended some of them for the tribulation that they were going through, the poverty that they were in. And then, one church that talked about them being in the midst of Satan's throne. And even in the midst of that, they didn't deny the faith, even though they talked about one of their members who had been killed because of their faith. Charity, service, and faith were three things brought up in one of the churches, and that they were growing in those things. There was more now than it was at the first. And who we have here? Welcome. It's good to see your face. We get to see you very often. All right, where was I? All right, some have not defiled their garments. He commended them for, not having defiled garments, in other words, not sinning. He talked to the church about having strength, keeping my word, not denying my name, and persevering. Those four things kind of were key characteristics, if you remember, of the Philadelphia church, that they had. They showed spiritual strength. They allowed Christ to move through their lives. They were obedient to his word. They didn't deny him even in the midst of persecution, and they persevered in the midst of that. So those were the commendations that he gave to the churches. What's interesting here is that we often focus on the condemnations, but the condemnations is one of the shortest lists of the things that are in here in chapters chapter 2 and 3. So first of all, you remember Ephesus, of course, they left their first love, which was really about, they were doing great things. They were a great church. They were kind of amazing, but they'd kind of forgotten why they were doing it. They kind of left their first love and kind of ignoring their love for Christ in the things that they were doing. A lot of them, the second one, some among you have followed idols and committed fornication. Before you write that one off, right, that was not just about, idol worship. It was about those who were, trying to get work, and in order to get work, they had to kind of go along with the worldly system, which at that point was idols and committing fornication. And so the real condemnation here is kind of getting along with the world in order to get ahead, right? So that's really the condemnation that's being talked about. And then that was in full bloom, as we talked about the false teacher in their midst, Jezebel, right? There was a large group of them that actually were following her and were following after idols, etc. So again, they were condemned for not recognizing that this was going on and doing something about it. And then we looked at the church that looked like they were alive, but actually they were dead. They had all the great programs. They looked great in the community. Everybody thought they were amazing, but in fact, they were dead as far as their relationship with the Lord. And they talked about them. Their works were not perfect, which meant that they were not complete. They were doing some things, but they were not doing them for the right reasons. or they were not doing it in the way that actually honored Christ. They were doing it for their own benefit and their own glory. And then finally, the Laodicea church, right? Neither hot nor cold. And you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of Christians kind of in this bank that are right in the middle, kind of lukewarm. They don't want people to think that they're you know, some kind of fanatic. But unfortunately, what Christ is looking for is fanatics, not folks who are lukewarm in the middle. And it just the point there was it just made him sick. Are you moving the screen or am I moving the screen? You did that? No? The screen just moved. That was just very strange. All right. Keep going. Judgment. Judgment. First thing, he would remove their candlestick. So again, the church would cease to exist, and that actually happened. He'd fight them with the sword of his mouth. In other words, he would use his words in the battle against them, all the things that he had already said to them. The next one was really about Jezebel, that she will be killed, and her children, those who preach the same things that she preaches, will be taken out. Not only will they be damned, but they will also be taken out of this world. Those who continue to do the idol worship and fornication, great tribulation will follow them unless they repent and turn from that. You know, and then this mention that he will come as a thief, and then the comment, as many as I love, I rebuke, not only towards Christians, but towards the world, that he's going to rebuke the world. And this got into the tribulation, etc., and the tribulation that's going to follow. So then he tells us what to do about it if we're stuck in some of these condemnations. And these are really important for us to know. What should we be actually doing? One, remember from where you come, right? Remember from where you started. Remember from where you followed. You once were doing it a lot better, and now you're kind of doing it only mediocre. Now you're kind of sliding into the world. So remember that. And then repent. You know, this is probably the most important word. Recognizing that your laziness for the Lord is a sin. It's not just not doing so well, right? Not doing so well is a sin. And that needs to be repented of. You need to ask forgiveness of the Lord for the way that you are acting, even in your not being a fanatic. So go back and do the first works, do the things that you learned at the beginning. Be faithful unto death. I will give you the crown of life. We'll be talking about the crown as we get into chapter 4. Hold fast to the things that you know are right. Hold fast to those things. Continue doing them. Be watchful against the things that are coming against you. Strengthen those things that remain, the things that you're doing well, the things that are good, strengthen those, continue to do those, make them even better. Remember what you've heard and received, right? This goes right back to the first one. Remember those things that you heard in the beginning. And then to the last church, he says, buy gold tried in fire, which was really about make sure that you have faith, right? And the only way you buy that is with your life. By righteousness, by knowledge and understanding, all those things that are needed by those that are unsaved. And then finally, be zealous, and ending again with repent, right? It really is about recognizing that we're not where we need to be, repenting of that, asking for forgiveness from the Lord, and moving forward. But the thing that actually made me start to do this list was this last one, because I kept coming to he that overcometh portions of these letters, and it just seemed like an amazing list of stuff. And as you look at this page, you'll see that it's one of the larger lists of things that are in this book. And so I think we don't want to. I think sometimes we look at these churches and we get focused on the things that they were doing wrong and what we need to do to fix those, and that's proper and good. But I think mostly these letters were written for encouragement. Right, to encourage the Christians who are in the midst of tribulation and trial, that there was some really good stuff coming. Yeah, that this end time for them is going to be a pretty fascinating, exciting, and wonderful time. So again, let's just go down the list real quick. He that overcometh will get the tree of life in the midst of paradise. Right. So again, they get heaven. It's an amazing place. Shall not be hurt by the second death, right? So they don't go through the white throne judgment, right? They're separated from the tribulation. to eat of the hidden manna, right? To get the food of Christ, to get the bread of life. They get the white stone and the name written on the white stone. If you remember, that was the entrance into the victory celebration, again, into heaven, and your name is on that stone. Power over the nations, rule them with a rod of iron. There will be a time when we have this amazing authority to rule, which just seems preposterous, but we have this amazing authority to rule over the nations in the end times. We get the morning star, which essentially is Christ. We get Christ. I mean, that is nothing stronger on this whole list than that statement right there. They shall walk with me in white, clothed in white raiment. So this is about our purity, right? This is about getting his righteousness in heaven. I will not blot out his name from the book of life. And the next one, I will confess his name before the Father and angels, are really saying the same thing, that God is responsible for your eternity. And there's no way your name's going to be blotted out. He's going to be confessing you. Jesus is going to be confessing you before the Father, before angels, etc. That we have this opportunity to serve, this opportunity to witness. Again, seeing that as a blessing, seeing that as a gift that he gives us, this opportunity to serve, this opportunity to witness. He saw it as a blessing. We need to see it as a blessing. I will keep you from the hour of temptation. So this really was about the tribulation. This was keeping them from the tribulation time, taking them out of it. We'll talk again more about that when we get into chapter 4. No man will take your crown. Again, in my mind, that's the same statement as I will not blot out his name from the book of life. Your crown cannot be taken away. Your name cannot be blotted out. A pillar will go out, a pillar that will go out no more. So this is a pillar. He's saying you are a pillar. Remember, this was the church that had earthquakes. He's saying, no, you're solid. You're not going to be shaken no matter what happens. God's name will be written on you. Jesus' name will be written on you. Jerusalem will be written on you. I mean, this is all about ownership. This is all about care. This is all about love and the relationship that we have with God and Jesus. That he would even write his name on us and say, he's mine. That's my child. I'm going to take care of them. And then sit on my throne, or Christ's throne, which is my Father's throne. Again, it's all about security. We are there. We're on his throne. We're on the Father's throne. We have authority. To me, this list is just mind blowing. The things that are promised to us as Christians. It does make it, when we whine and complain about stuff, we ought to have this list nearby, right? Compared to this list, our whining and complaining about stuff and about things that go on in this life are just so trivial. I know it doesn't seem at the moment in the time, it can get overwhelming, but you got to have this list, because those of us who are Christians, those of us who overcome, we're going to have some amazing things ahead of us. So he that hath to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. I think he said a lot to the churches. And so I just wanted to give you this just kind of as a reminder of all the things that were said there. All right, so Revelation chapter 4. Definitely start a new section here. So remember back, you don't have to turn, but if you remember back in chapter 1, verse 19, was kind of the outline of the book, right? It was the things that have been, the things that are, and the things that shall be. We are now moving to the section of the book, which is the things that shall be. Here in chapter 4. I will say that chapters 4 and 5 are kind of an introduction to the rest of the kind of historical part of Revelation, which really starts in chapter 6. But we do move to heaven here in chapter 4 and start getting some important information that gets us ready for what happens as we get into chapter 6. Remember again that John is commanded to write these things all the way back in chapter 1, write these things down. So he wrote down the first vision back in chapter 1. He gave us the words of Christ to the churches in chapters 2 and 3. And now he's writing down the things that shall be from the next vision that we see here in chapter 4. Let me just read verse 1. It says, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, 'Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this.'" So first thing I just want to mention is that it says, after these things. So what things is John referring to when he says after these things? Is your mic not working there? I can't hear anything.
It's talking about the judgments and how God has just judged them before in chapter 3.
Is it talking about after the church in general?
Yeah, I think he's talking more general here about after the church age, right? So really you got chapter 2 and 3, which is again addressed to the churches and the church age. Now as we get into chapter 4, he's saying after this, after the church age is over, after that is behind us, then these things happen. If you go to the last phrase in verse 1, it says, "I will show you things which must take place after this," right? So he's saying after after the church age, now I'm going to show you the things that are going to take place after this, after the church age. Now let me say up front, the commentaries that I am reading heavily lean towards the pre-tribulation rapture of the church, premillennial kind of context. Now, so I'll be talking about some of that stuff as we go through here, but I just want to be honest with you to let you know that is probably where a lot of the teaching that I'm going to give is going to come from. But I'm going to try to balance it as we go through, but I just want you to know that it's probably going to be leaning in that direction, because in all honesty, from what I'm seeing, it's leaning in that direction. So I just wanted to say that up front. All right, so after these things, we're going to talk about what happens after this. So after these things, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. So he looks, he sees something, right? He's on earth at this point, but he looks and he sees this door standing open in heaven. Mine says, "Behold, a door standing open in heaven." Did you say "behold"? Or some word like that?
Yes. Yes, mine does.
Mine doesn't.
What's
The NIV says, "There before me was a door standing open in heaven."
Yeah, so there's an exclamation word in there, and I just want you to make sure, if your translation doesn't have it, there's an aha or a behold or a hoo-ha right there in the front end that's in the Greek that some of the translations didn't put in there, that absolutely belongs in there. So I think he's really, this is a big deal. He's saying, "Behold, holy cow, look at what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a door open into heaven, a door that allows us access to heaven, a door that not only John can go through, that we can go through. There's a door open into heaven." It does remind me, go back to Matthew chapter 3 for a minute. I will tell you that I resisted the temptation to do a whole study on heaven when I got here because I just wanted to, but I resisted that temptation. But look at Matthew chapter 3, verse 16. Here we have Jesus being baptized. It says, "When he was baptized, Jesus came up immediately from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him. And he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting upon him." So here's another time where we see kind of the heavens are opened up, right? And we see the dove coming down. So it's a similar picture that we have back in Revelation, where he's on earth, but he's seeing the heavens opened before him. It's the heavens, it's where God lives, right? It's where Jesus has gone. It's where Jesus has gone. It's the place Jesus is preparing a place for us. For the rest of the book, John spends most of his time in heaven, giving us information from his perspective in heaven. There are a couple times where it appears that he's back on earth, but for most of the time he's in heaven, giving us perspective. So, so here in chapter 4, we're jumping to heaven for the rest of what we're going to hear from here on out. So first thing is, and the first voice that I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me. So we heard this trumpet voice before.
Yes.
If you go back to 1:10, the first time when John has a vision, he says, "I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice as a trumpet, saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last," right? So he identifies himself there that this trumpet is Jesus, right? So here, when we hear the first voice that he hears is a trumpet. So this is, and the voice of the trumpet is really about a voice of authority, a strong and powerful voice, right? I mean, he's trying to give that perspective. But it's Christ, right, speaking to him and giving him this invitation. And here he says, "Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this." And then verse 2, "Immediately I was in the Spirit." So here Christ invites him up into heaven, and immediately he is in the Spirit. Obviously, I'm not sure he has a choice to say yes or no there. Come up into heaven, and he's up into heaven, right? He's carried there spiritually. Let me also point out that there are people who think that when John here goes to heaven, that is actually their rapture, that this is when the whole church goes to heaven. I don't think so, because really he's saying, I'm just taking you up here to give you some information. I'm going to tell you about what's coming. It's really a revelation, rather than a glorification, if you will, kind of activity. So I don't want you to. There are those who want to say, "Oh yeah, this is obviously when the rapture occurs," and so it's very clear in scriptures. Not so clear to me. But again, he wants to show him what's going to happen after this, after the church age. So the thing I do have to say here, though, is once we get into chapter 4 all the way through chapter 20, there's no more mention of the church. There may be some mention of the church as we get into 21 and 22, but there's no mention of the church as we go through this historical time period that displays what is going on in the tribulation and what's happening there. So my point is one of the trying to figure out what the right word is. The interpretation then that the church is not involved in the tribulation is that it's not specifically mentioned. And so the question then is, when does the rapture occur in Revelation? If it's not here in these words that I just wrote, and if in chapters 4 through 20 the church is not mentioned, obviously the church is mentioned in chapters 2 and 3, right? We talked to specific churches. When does the rapture actually occur in Revelation? The answer to that is it occurs between chapter 3 and 4. It's not written about. It's not clearly stated in Revelation that there will be a rapture. Now, there's lots of things that tell you that a rapture has occurred, but there's nothing that says, okay, here's when the rapture happens. Now we're going on into heaven. So I do want to show you a couple of things. Yeah, let me just show them to you now. No, I'm going to wait and show them to you later. Yeah, I'm going to wait and show them to you later. Haha. Because I got to tell you something else first. All right, so let's go back to verse 2. So immediately I was in the spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. So immediately, again, he's in heaven, he's in the spirit, and then we have another behold, right? So the first behold was, wow, there's a door open in heaven. That's incredible. Second, now we have a second behold, and that is that there's a throne set in heaven, and one sat on that throne. So just as amazing to John is that there was a door that he could see into heaven. And once he gets into heaven, that he sees this throne. And really all of chapter 4 is about the throne room and what's going on in and around the throne. You could say that the outline of chapter 4 is talking about what is on the throne, what's around the throne, what's from the throne, what's before the throne, what's toward the throne. It's all about the throne. And we'll see those details as we go through it. One thing to mention is that, when we think about the throne, I don't want you to so much think about it as a piece of furniture, right? As this decked out golden thing that someone is sitting on. It's more about authority. It's more about sovereignty. It's more about a God who sits on that throne rather than the throne itself. I don't want you to get fixated on a piece of furniture. It's about his sovereign position, if you will. The other thing that's interesting is, where is the throne located? And before you answer me, I'm gonna give you the answer, because you're gonna go left and I want you to go right. It's not in the palace. You notice that the throne is not in the palace. It doesn't say anything about a palace, does it? Normally a throne is in a palace. Go over to chapter 7 for a minute. Verse 15 talks about the throne again here. It says, therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. So notice that what it says, therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple, and he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. The indication here is that the throne is actually in a temple, not in a palace. Right? The throne is in a temple, not in a palace. Go over to chapter 11, verse 19. Says, then the temple of God was opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple, and there were lightnings and noises and thunderings and earthquake and a great hail. We'll see in a few minutes that all of these lightnings and noises and thunderings all come from the throne, and here it says that all these come from the temple, again indicating that this throne is in the temple. And one more place in chapter 16. Verse 17, 16, 17. Mine says, then the seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, it is done. And there were noises and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as mighty and great earthquake as had not occurred since men were on the earth, etc., etc. So again, I just want to point out that this throne that we're going to be talking about all through chapter 4 is in the temple, that God occupies. And that the important point there is, we go into a palace for one reason. We go into a temple for a different reason, right? We go into a temple, it's about worship. It's about it's about a relationship with God. Whereas we go into a palace, it's about political things, right? So I think his throne being in a temple is a very important part of the story. Now, the other thing you'll notice that it says I'm back in 4:2 again, the throne was set in heaven. It was, and that word indicates that it was sitting there permanently. It was sitting there firmly. This is not a movable chair. This is not a portable seat that they move around. This throne that is in heaven is a permanent fixture. This sovereignty, This kingship is a permanent feature that has always been there, will always be there. It is set in heaven. It's set there. Okay. Now, and then there was one who sat on the throne, and he who sat there was like a jasper, a sardis stone in appearance, and we'll get on to that in a minute. But first of all, there's one sitting on the throne. This is not a small piece of information either, right? There is someone sitting on the throne. The throne has always been there, and that one has always been sitting on it. He has always been reigning there. He has always been in charge there. He will always be in charge there, right? There's a sense of permanence and also a sense of God's always having authority. So I do want to look at a couple things, a couple other verses here. Go back to 1 Kings chapter 22 to show you that this picture is not unique to John. 1 Kings 22, to go way back, in verse 19. First Kings chapter 22, verse 19. We're in the middle of a prophecy from Micaiah, a prophet that didn't get his own book, but has a nice prophecy in here. You go down to verse 19. It says, "Then Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the hosts of heaven standing by with his right hand and on his left." And he goes on to talk more about the prophecy. But again, all the way back here, we see this picture of the Lord sitting on his throne. Go to Psalm 47. Psalm 47, verse 7. Again, this picture of God as the king. In verse 7, "For God is the king of all the earth. Sing praises with understanding. God reigns over the nation. God sits on his holy throne." Right? So here we see this picture of God as the king sitting on the throne. But again, the throne is in the temple. He's a king that is also a priest. He's a king that is also the one to be worshipped. Isaiah chapter 6. Some of you knew I was going to go there. Isaiah chapter 6, verse 2. Really verse 1, sorry. Isaiah 6:1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. We're actually going to come back to Isaiah chapter 6 a little bit later on. But that's the main thing again there. He's sitting on the throne. And then one more place in Ezekiel chapter 1. You go to Daniel and turn your left, you get to Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 1. And you may want to put a little sticky or something there in Ezekiel chapter 1. We're going to go back to that several times as we're going in here in chapter 4. But Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 26. Ezekiel also has a vision of heaven, and it's really all of his chapter 1 here. But at the end of it, in verse 26, "And above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like a sapphire stone, and the likeness of a throne was the likeness of the appearance of a man high above it." So here Ezekiel uses the word "a likeness of a throne." Again, it's not about the furniture. It's about the authority. It's about the sovereignty that's displayed by him being in that position. All right. So again, the point here being that there is a throne, there is God who sits on it. He's always been there. He's always been reigning. He's always been in charge. He's always been the sovereign. Now in verse 3, it gives us this description. "He who sat there was like a jasper and a sardius stone in appearance. If you go to Revelation chapter 21, verse 11. Here we have a description of one of the angels, but they use some interesting words here. In verse 11, it says, having the glory of God, her light was like the most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. So again, if we go back to Revelation, and it says that God here looks like a jasper and a sardius stone. The jasper is, there's some question as to what stone that is. And really, there are people who take that all over the place. So the only real reference we have is the one I just read to you in Revelation, where it says it's a clear crystal. There are those who believe that this is very likely a diamond. That's called here a jasper. And then you have this sardius stone, which is known to be more like a red-like stone. A ruby, if you were, a bright fiery red. So here you have this crystal clear jasper, and you have this sardius stone. So when they look on God on the throne, what they see is bright, white, flashing, crystal, red, flashing, bright, crystal, overwhelming brightness and whiteness and lightness, right? This is not dissimilar from what we've seen in the descriptions that we've had. If you go back even to chapter 1, we looked at the description of Christ in chapter 1, verse 14. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow. His eyes were like flames of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as refined in a furnace. His voice is the sound of many words. You just get this overwhelming sense of brightness. Right, this overwhelming sense of light and brightness. And I told you to keep your finger in Ezekiel. If you go back there to chapter 1 again, I didn't keep my finger, so I'm having to flip back. Ezekiel chapter 1. We looked at verse 26. Let's read that again. And then following. It says, above the firmament over their heads was the likeness of a throne, in appearance like the sapphire. So I'm in Ezekiel 1:26. In appearance like a sapphire stone, in the likeness of a throne was the likeness of the appearance of a man high above it. Also in the appearance of his waist and upward, I saw as it were the color of amber, with the appearance of fire all around and within it. From the appearance of his waist and downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, with brightness all around. And then he adds in verse 28, like the appearance of a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the brightness all around it. This was the appearance and the likeness of the glory of the Lord. What you see here in Ezekiel and in John is two men who are just overwhelmed by what they see, right? And they don't know how to describe it. They're pulling out every jewel they can think of, using the word brightness over and over again, whiteness and brightness and light, and you see the light reflecting off of these crystals in every direction. It's kind of an amazing picture that you have here. So go back to Revelation again. So he who sat there was like a jasper and a sardius stone in appearance. Then it says there was a rainbow around the throne. We saw that in Ezekiel also. There was a rainbow around the throne in appearance like an emerald. Now emerald, you know, is green. So somehow you have this rainbow that has again, I'm seeing it as a rainbow that has a crystalline-like character, right? So it's sparkly and shiny rainbow. What was the name of those ponies that we had as the girls had as kids?
My Little Pony.
The My Little Ponies with the. Sorry, that's where it goes. With the rainbow over the top of them. But anyway, I think it's just kind of an indescribable picture that they've got here, right? You've got this this beauty, this splendor. The other thing that's interesting is that a lot of the first things he says about the brightness and the whiteness kind of give you the idea of God in his judgment, in his purity, right? And then you have the rainbow, and what's the picture that we get from a rainbow from Scripture?
Promise.
Promise, right? It's the faithfulness of God that He would not destroy the world again by water, right? So here you have the wrath of God and the intensity of God wrapped around by the rainbow of faithfulness and promise. It's just all of God in this picture that you have, that these folks are seeing Him. You see His wrath, you see His power, you see His beauty, and you see His promise and His love and His mercy, all in this picture of Him that's just given by jasper, sardius stone, and an emerald. It's pretty an amazing statement. All right. Oh my goodness, it's not 10 o'clock.
Yes.
How did it get to be 10 o'clock? Okay, well, I definitely can't go into verse 4, and so I can't answer the other question that I told you I was going to wait and tell you later, because that comes after I tell you about verse 4. So I'll leave you with a homework assignment then. That's good. This is good, because verse 4 is a little tricky. Let me just read it. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and on the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their heads. So the question is, who are these 24? They call them elders here. Who are they? I got to tell you, the commentaries are all over the place on these 24. So I want you to think on that one. It's really important, and it really is important for us answering kind of what our place is as we go forward in the rest of this book. So who are the 24? Why 24? It's a funny number in Scripture. So why 24, and who are the 24? That's your homework assignment for next week. Boy, that took me longer than I thought to get to 3 verses. So anyway, we only have 11 verses in the chapter 4, so we should go finish that up next week. Oh, Joe had a prayer request from Shannon. You want to share that? So, I'll just read it to you. So tell Rich to remember the record button. Oh, that's you know. I can't be there today. I'm not feeling well. I really want to hear the lesson. Please continue prayer for my niece's husband, Steve. He's been in and out of the hospital 3 times since the original stay 2 weeks ago. The good news is that his bladder shows no signs of cancer, just having a lot of blood clots. Surgery on his kidney tumor is scheduled for next week. So that's from Shannon. So if you could remember her, that would be great. Yes. Oh, yeah, so we're going to have company tonight. The brother who I've never met is coming to visit.
Oh, wow.
So some of you know what that means, and you can tell the rest of them who don't know what that means. But yeah, so the brother I've never met is coming to visit tonight, so it should be interesting to see how that. He's an interesting character. He's completely unsaved, so I'd appreciate your prayers as we meet with him and his wife.
Also, our granddaughter Caitlin has strep throat. She wasn't able to go to the baby shower yesterday. She was very sad. So prayer for her. And also we start keeping those 3 granddaughters on Tuesday for a week. So they'll be here at 7 o'clock Tuesday morning to stay for the week while Barbara just to go to a conference. And also they're going to visit Trisha down in Athens for a day or 2. So prayer for them for a safe trip.
Hey, a good football weekend, right? Georgia won, Virginia Tech won, and Alabama lost. Can't be any better than that.
Hey, Rick. I was going to suggest 2 weeks from today, if people want to, we can go do lunch after church at Jason's Deli. That was one of the note card places that we had, so I was just going to throw it out there just after church, go to Jason's Deli. 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks?
We won't be here, but y'all go.
So we won't be here in 2 weeks.
We're going to Port Royal.
I haven't talked to Hugh about that yet, but we won't be here in 2 weeks. Yeah, so we're going down to Trisha's for Thanksgiving, so we won't be here in 2 weeks, but sounds like a good thing for y'all to do. All right, y'all have a good week. Love you. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Sorry about that. Oh, look, now it's gone.
Must be because he stopped the recording.